All right, teammates. We are back once again. If this is your first time listening to the Move Swiftly podcast, welcome to the number one podcast on innovative teamwork. Great to have you. Looking forward to having you back for more. To my regular listeners, you guys already know I spent the past 3 years now teaching at a school named the Center for Creative Education. And one of the things that actually drew me to the school is the relationship that we have with teaching artists, the folks out there who are constantly engaging young people in the arts as they're learning these life skills. And, this guest got James Walters, man. The guest I got on, I purposely didn't tell him certain things until we started recording because of how aligned, what I do with what he does, photographer from a photographer perspective, but he's also content creation. Everything that I try to relay on to the kids in terms of what you're going to be needing as of post 2025, he's all about it. So, all that, James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so just give us kind of your background story about where it all started, because one of the things that I know from a personal perspective, especially having a name like Aswan Crookshank, as a
Mm.
creator, you kind of always have to be on the outside looking in. You're never really gonna fit in particularly to a certain clique because you're always thinking about certain things in a different way. And this started for me as a child. So, walk us through your background a little bit about, how school was for you and what it was like, what the journey was like in terms of becoming such a prolific creator.
Yeah, I'm kind of I don't know if I'm the opposite of what you described in terms of creativity, but I was always a creative kid, but I was one of those at home that really liked to fly under the radar, which developed a set of skills for me that allowed me in school to kind of blend in with all the different groups. So I was hanging out a little bit with all the weird theater kids. I was hanging out with the really smart kids a little bit, just a little bit at a time. I would dip into their world,
Right.
and I was welcomed enough. And I had a bunch of friends who were into sports. I was never into sports. I didn't go to see their sports, but I just kind of could relate to everyone. If you're at all familiar with the Enneagram, I'm
Mhm.
the I'm the nine, which nines tend to take on traits of all the other different kinds of personalities depending on what they need to. And that's something that was just innate for me.
Right.
But it allowed me to, like I said, this theme of dipping into people's worlds for
Mhm.
just a little bit
Right.
started to build. And when I was in high school, I didn't like math so much. And I got
That
creative
we
on
just
how.
actually we were just teaching a lesson. So we today we have a sub, but me and the sub were
Okay.
just teaching a lesson on math. And I was saying the same thing to listen. I have a college degree, but I had a one on my math entry test going
All
into
right.
college. And I told her, look, I don't like the idea of memorizing these equations. I like the idea of teaching math as it applies to something that they're actually gonna need to learn in life. So I don't feel so bad at all now that, I see what it is. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. No, it's so when I was in high school, I started getting really creative on how to avoid taking the more advanced maths and the ones that were supposedly required, but I figured out a way to skip like algebra 2 and some of those things by taking a photography class. It counted as a science.
I got you. I got you.
That
Right. Hmm.
that got me in the dark room as
Mhm.
a junior in high school. And then I was like, man, I really kind of like this. I could create my own world
Yeah.
through the lens, and then I could figure out how am I going to display that, through the dark room. And back
Mhm.
then it was all film. And then the next year rolled around and I had to figure out how to swap another credit. And so I figured out how to go to the community college, even though I was in high school, and I could take another photography class, which
Mhm.
counted against another math class. So all that is to say, I fell in love with photography, being able to tell people stories, but also create little worlds
Mhm.
there. Went
Mhm.
to college for it, learned a lot of math that relates to
Right.
photography. Like you said, if it can be applied, I'm there for it.
So you sort of already mentioned this though, because as you're coming up, I would imagine there's no social media. I would
Yeah.
imagine there's no, online, these pics online, and there's no AI, there's no people now generating their own photos. Walk us through the journey in which you've had to actually take and some of the adjustments that you've had to take as technology has increased and become more efficient or less efficient, however it is. Walk us through how you were able to adapt to those changes.
Yeah, it's It's funny because at the very beginning of my career, there was a massive change going on already. So when I was in college, I was working on Photoshop like 2.0. That was in the mid 90s.
Yeah, that
And
was that like a Mac program or something?
yeah,
Or
it was really only on Mac that I know of, and you couldn't do a whole lot with it. You could do some copy paste, that kind of stuff. You could swap things out, but there it was limited.
right.
And when I went to work, I went to school for commercial photography. So I went to work in some really big commercial studios right after college. And the cool thing was it was that transition from film to digital.
Yeah.
And we were, the film, we were still shooting film,
Mhm.
and we were still trying to convince clients to come with us on this journey. We had these digital cameras, and a lot of clients were like, "Oh, I'm scared of it," and that was kind of the wild west of digital, where you had to figure things out. You didn't really have a YouTube you could go to and learn how it worked. You were learning in real time,
Right.
and it's kind of the same, which is why I'm excited. I'm not daunted about AI and all this stuff. Every time a new thing comes out, I'm like, "Oh, this is so cool,"
Hmm.
and I think that goes back to 30 years ago. There was a huge shift, and I personally saw a lot of photographers when I was 20. I
Hmm.
saw a lot of guys who were my age now. They were in their 50s, and they were retiring from the game because they did not want to learn
Right.
this new digital thing. And I was like, wow, okay, that's cool. So I saw it as an opening for myself because
Right.
I was willing
Yeah,
to learn.
I have a lot of experience with photographers. My dad, he ran his own architectural company for years, and he would had this big digital camera that was around the house. I remember I would actually take pictures with the camera. He would actually go out, look at properties and do a lot of the work in the creative space. And I look at myself as someone that was blessed enough to see someone that was able to turn it into a business, and it wasn't just a hobby for him. Even to this day, some of the people that I've been blessed enough to actually have on the show were able to figure out how they were going to niche down and turn it into a business. Some folks, focus only on weddings. Some folks only focus on sports photography. What would you say was like your thing when you decided? I know you mentioned commercial and stuff like that, but what was your thing to say, this is going to be the clients I'm serving because I know this group of people is going to be the ones that can ultimately turn my business, my dream of running this business, into an actual business?
Yeah, and that comes back to I'll just backtrack. The thing I've always loved about photography is there are so many businesses that are an opportunity within photography.
If everyone could afford it, they do it. They would definitely pay for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And the thing is, I started out in commercial because I was young and I wanted to learn how that side of the world worked. And I loved creating things right in front of the camera. So day in, day out. And at that point, I didn't have a business for myself. It was a 9 to 5. I worked for a huge studio. It was like a little mini Hollywood. We had different room sets, and we had carpenters and painters and people who would come and put these things together, then interior designers who would make the
Mhm.
room look amazing. I would go in there and light it,
Right.
and I would photograph it. And I loved working with the clients because I would go to the same place every day
Mhm.
and I would tell different stories for different companies. Sometimes they were trying to sell just hardware, like for a hardware store. Sometimes it was lingerie for people who made that. And sometimes it was jeans. Sometimes it was race car drivers with their race car because I'm in North Carolina and Charlotte, is a big
Right. Yeah.
NASCAR place.
Yeah.
So it was different every day. And I loved that, but I was going to the same place. And after about 10 years, I was like, I'm ready for a different adventure.
Mhm.
Sometimes I photographed people, but that wasn't most of what I did. So what I decided to do is I decided I was going to jump into my own business. I
Mhm.
was going to photograph weddings. And that was right around 2004 when two things were happening. Digital cameras were getting small enough and they were getting affordable enough to where I could get one myself, didn't have to rely on the company paying for it,
Mhm.
and I could take it to a photo shoot without it being tethered to a computer.
Right.
And the combination of those two, well, combination of that plus weddings were people were starting to lighten up on the style. People were more going toward the style that was a little more fashionable, things they saw in magazines, and
Right.
it was less of the stiff, just one person standing beside the other smiling like you did back in the 80s or whatever.
Right.
So with the combination of those two things, I started getting fascinated with the whole wedding thing because now I was going to different places and I was telling the same story. Instead of like in my studio days, I was going to the same place, I was telling different stories for different clients.
Right.
I had different clients, but the thing about weddings is they're sort of like if you've ever seen a theatrical production like Phantom of the Opera or The Nutcracker, it's if you go 10 times, you're going to see pretty much the same
Same thing.
thing.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
how weddings are. There's a script, there's an audience, there's a wardrobe
It
that's
becomes
pretty.
redundant. Yeah, and I know a lot of people that kind of fade out of that because they
Yeah,
can't make a living off that, especially nowadays. I mean, what if people stop getting married? Like the few
yeah,
people that I've known that have been in that business, they have to figure out ways to branch out. Maybe they'll shoot their honeymoon too, or maybe they'll shoot the engagements. There's so many things that come with it, or even the
yeah.
child's birth or something like that.
Yeah, and for 15 years, I specialized in nothing but shooting weddings, and I definitely got the timing right. You know, that wasn't anything that I can claim, oh, I did all this stuff right. Sometimes you're just at the right place in the right time. And I
Exactly.
was definitely that, you know, like from 2020, yeah, 2004 to like 2014 were the big years. And
Right.
then it's kind of tapered off and I've gotten much more, I'm kind of going back where I started and getting a lot more into branding, but I love working with creative entrepreneurs now.
Yeah. And that's
And
actually where I wanted to, and I'm glad you brought that up because, like I
yeah,
mentioned, the school that I'm out here in West Palm Beach, and the school that we teach at, we're closely really monitoring the kids' reading scores, and we try our best to reinforce that. If you had, like, if anybody's listening and you wanted to kind of convey this idea, this concept in terms of teaching creativity to the young people, where would you start them? Like, where would you tell a young person to start that sees you and is inspired by the fact that you're able to do this for a living?
yeah. Well, it's interesting you asked that question because I'm actually working on a project that does
Mhm.
exactly that. I'm working on a book with my daughter. My daughter's 16. She illustrated her first book this past year.
No
And
kidding. Are you
yeah,
like full blown like what kind of book?
so it's, I think you can see it right behind me. Yeah, right behind me, right there. It's a kid's book. It's for
Mhm.
younger kids, but my daughter, she is very social
Yeah.
and she doesn't love school so much. So when she's in school, she tends to doodle a
Yeah.
lot.
We have a lot of those here. A whole lot of those. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, well, what she decided to do, and luckily her mom had the vision. She saw some of these doodles and was like, "We should do something with that."
Hmm.
And so my daughter created an ABC book, and all of these it's called Micro Monsters, and so she just doodled these cool little monsters and named them with all the different letters of the alphabet, and just made up a few things
Right.
that was pertinent to that doodle.
Right.
And so now we're working on the second project, which is I'm going to be teaching a summer camp
Hmm.
this June, and it's going to be to kids from third grade to eighth grade. And we're going to be talking about the power of story and being able to tell stories both with words, but also pictures.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that is huge. And that sets off all sort of creative lights in people when they start thinking about stories.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's what sticks, folks. All right. Anybody listening, I know the majority of folks out there who listen to the show are business owners. And it's important for you as a business owner to take this information in because the need for you to stay creative is incredibly important with all the competition out there. And the way you're able to articulate your story is something that's going to be so incredibly important because you're going to have to do it in so many ways. If you're going to fight for that client, if you're going to fight for that customer, they got to hear your story virtually. They got to hear your story visually. They got to hear your story in the written format. They got to hear your story through a picture. They got to hear your story through word of mouth. Your story has got to be the thing that actually spreads. And I'm bringing all that up because, I think it's important that when you talk to kids about telling their story, it's painful for some of them. All right, I know for us personally, we deal with the students I'm talking about here. They have a lot of broken homes, and there were times in which I would have them maybe do some public speaking and open up, and some of them would be in tears just trying to get their story out, and I'd be encouraging them, hey, no, tell it, because the easier and easier you're able to tell it. I'm not gonna say it's gonna just be easy, but the more you're able to tell that story, the more authentic you're gonna become. So as you are like building out this platform, how do you address the people that say, hey, I don't want to tell my story. I just want to get my job. I just want to do what I'm told. But telling that story is kind of scary to me, and just the idea of it is kind of scary to them.
Yeah, I work through that with a lot of people a lot, and I've even got a podcast now. It's called A Joyful Rebellion, and
Yeah, I saw that,
that's
right.
yeah, that's really what it's all about, is helping people understand why it's so important to tell their stories. But I don't say that to them. I bring them along the journey with me, and so I talk to a lot of people who have been through their own, what I call joyful rebellion. It's is when you get to a point in your life, and it can happen at a lot of different ages. It tends to happen kind of after 35, and like between 35 and 50 for a lot of people, but sometimes it happens like right after college. You get that job and you're like, "Ew, is this what life's about?" And
19,
so
actually, for me, I tore my ACL and I was 19 years old, and yeah, that was an absolute eye opener.
yeah, and it's about that time in life when you think you've done everything right. You did everything your parents told you to do to have a great life and to be happy, and everything society told you to do to be successful. And outwardly, you look successful, but inside, you're like, ugh. I
Exactly.
feel like I could be getting more life out of life.
Right.
So I talk to people like that every single week. And it's so fun because those people's stories resonate so much with people that I talk to day in and day out, just regular, like my friends, my family. And they're
Right.
like, oh yeah, that one person that really spoke to me, because I talk to so many people who are kind of waiting to do something. They're waiting to write that book. They're waiting to tell their story. And is like you said, they just don't know quite how to, or they can't get out of their own way
Yeah.
and realize that they're important enough to share their story with other people. And the thing that is most profound when I talk to people is they don't realize how much they can help others by telling their story. They think they're just being, the trying to be the center of attention,
Mhm.
when actually I'm like, no, it's not so much everybody look at you. It's more like, hey, let me tell you my story so maybe you can learn something from it. Maybe we can relate a little bit better and connect on a human level. And when I
Right.
say it like that, they're like, oh, I never really thought about it like that. I just thought I was being selfish by hogging all the attention if I tried to tell my story.
And I've heard it said it's actually the opposite to not tell the story. I mean, I remember actually there was a this was back when Clubhouse, I'd be on Clubhouse regularly, and there was a young man who came and stepped on the mic and was like, "Man, I got this thing that I want that's burning, but I don't know if I should put the book out." And I immediately responded and said, "How would you feel if you didn't put it out? Like, how
Yeah.
would you feel if you didn't put this thing out that you were so passionate about every single night, wondering what it could have been, what it was all about?" So I will re-emphasize that to anybody that has a story, has something that they want to express, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. Just think about what it's gonna feel like if it's not out there and you didn't give it your all, and you just never would know. It would absolutely eat you inside if it's not out there. So I do want to be very respectful of your time, and you already sort of mentioned this, but can you speak a little bit about, what's next? If people want to get in touch with you, how can they reach out? No, you already mentioned the camp. That I mean, listen, that would be awesome if you can get it out here in Florida. If we can, if we can collaborate on anything like that. So, kind of speak to people about what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, what's going on with me is I've got several different projects in the works. I just wrapped up a book back in November, actually. So it was a couple months ago. And it was my first coffee table book. So I've written a book before that, but it had no pictures in it. It was really just a memoir.
Oh, man, I love those, man, those coffee table, because you never like you just get mesmerized by the photos.
Yeah, and this one was really different for me because in my professional life, I've photographed people every day in, day out. This book has no people in it at all. It's called Meditations of the Mundane.
Mhm.
And the whole premise behind it is, as a photographer, and especially as a commercial photographer back when I did that, it sometimes photographs objectify people, and not in a harmful way. I mean, sometimes it is in a harmful way, but what I did in commercial photography is sometimes you want to sell jeans and your client wants to sell their jeans that they make. And the jeans become more relatable if a person's wearing them instead of just, being on a shelf. Right.
Exactly.
And so we hire a model, and we don't really care about that model's name. We don't care about their story. We just want them to wear the jeans and look good and represent the brand. And that's the kind of objectifying I'm talking about. So I started thinking, that's been going on for a long time. What if I flip the script and I started taking objects, things I see? I love to walk and I love old cities. So when I go to an old city like a Savannah, Georgia, or a Charleston, South Carolina, or even somewhere in Europe that's just ancient, I love to walk, and you see things that you wouldn't see if you were in a car or on a bike or anything like that, just going too fast if you're doing that.
Mhm.
So I started photographing these things.
Mhm.
And then I started thinking, all right, what if these things, they had a story, they had a life, they had hopes and dreams? What if they had opinions of all the people who were walking around them, basically ignoring them? And so for every photo, I started writing a little story.
Mm.
It went along with it. And once I got up to about 90, I was like, man, I can't do this anymore. So I just compiled it all, made a book,
Right.
and got that out of my system. So to
Yeah.
answer the
I mean, yeah,
question,
that's awesome. I mean, the process is amazing. Just taking walks now. It's crazy how creativity works, folks.
absolutely. And that spun off a lot of creativity, but now I'm working on a different book project. No pictures in this book. It's more of like a not self-help, but it's more personal growth.
Yeah.
And that's the project I'm working on right now, plus working on the book that's going to go along with this summer camp
Right.
that I'm training the kids on, telling stories. So just really trying to get a lot more in the creative space and help people come along and grow in their own creativity.
Exactly. And we all have it, folks. We all have it. I don't care
Yeah.
how old you are, it's there, but you just have to pay attention to it, and you courageously have to move. You have to move that needle. It's there in you. Every single person has that creative niche that they want to get out, but too often does the world tell you to move the opposite direction. It is there. Just dig a little deeper. I remember actually hiring a coach, and we were coming up with like slogans and ideas. He goes, go a little deeper, Aswan. Just go a little deeper. Everyone's talking mindset, but you got to be the move swiftly guy. You got to do something that's going to catch somebody's attention and absolutely hit that home run. So, all that being said, how can people get in touch with you if they want to hear more? Where
Oh,
do you
yeah.
want to send them?
Yeah, everything I do can be found at jameswalters.com. So that's my central place. You can see what I'm up to. You can see everything about the books, everything, photo shoots I've done recently. So that's where it all happens. And would love to have a conversation with anybody who is more interested about creativity and story.
Absolutely. And I will include all that in the show notes as well. So, James, the final thing I do to close out all the shows is I want you to use your imagination a little bit. Let's say you're back in high school, you got stuck in some math class that is incredibly boring, and you're learning quadratic equations, and you're saying to yourself, man, I don't know why I'm here. So, pretend that version of you is here in the Zoom room and give that young man some words of encouragement, and we will officially close.
All right. I would absolutely look at them and say, hey, what you're learning here is not exactly math. What you're learning here is how to get through an uncomfortable situation, because right now you're bored, and right now you want to be anywhere else but right here. But this is important for you to be here. Use this feeling, channel this feeling into some other energy. And whether that's you just go extra hard on your skateboard when you get out of here, that's cool. But just know that there are going to be a lot of situations like this in your life where you don't want to be there right now. But if you really think about it, in about 20 minutes, you won't be here anymore. And then in about 20 more years and a couple of cycles of that, you won't be here anymore at all on the earth. So make the most of it. And yeah, just have an awesome day. Make an awesome day. You got to create it. You don't always have it.
That is so awesome. I mean, you took me back to my math classes, and I remember how bored I was, and remember not wanting to ever feel that way ever again because of how bored I was during those times. And when you talk about really holding on to that feeling of uncomfort, you know now when it comes up as an adult, I want nothing to do with that. I'm moving on. So, take that as the promise of this show, guys. Whatever the challenge is, whatever the obstacle is, this is why we're here. This is why the show is the number one show on innovative teamwork. So, all that being said, fellow teammates, continue to move swiftly. We will talk more soon.
All right.